Why would you do such a thing? I'm gonna make you regret your actions.
I'm sorry.
A flight attendant dumped white powder on a passenger, laughing as she said, "Maybe this will make you acceptable." But a 12-year-old girl stood up when no one else would. What happened months later changed her life forever. This is a story about courage, dignity, and how one moment of bravery can ripple across time in ways no one could predict. What you're about to hear actually happened, and by the end you'll understand why sometimes the smallest voices carry the most power. But before we begin, let me ask you something. Have you ever witnessed something wrong and felt that knot in your stomach, that voice telling you to do something but fear held you back? Keep that feeling in mind as you hear what a child did when faced with that exact moment. And if this story moves you, hit that subscribe button because we share real stories about real people who remind us what humanity should look like. Now, let me take you back to a Tuesday morning in late June, to a girl who was about to face a test she never studied for. Shayla Morrison was 12 years old and she was terrified. She sat in seat 14A of Flight 2847 from Detroit to Houston, her hands gripping the armrests as the plane taxied toward the runway. It was her first time flying alone. Her mother, Judith, had walked her all the way to the security checkpoint, holding her hand tight, going over the instructions one more time. Gate number. Boarding pass. Don't talk to strangers. Call as soon as you land. Shayla had nodded at everything, trying to look brave, trying to look like the mature, almost teenager she wanted to be. But inside, her heart hammered against her ribs. Judith Morrison worked double shifts as a nurse at Detroit Mercy Hospital. She worked nights when the pay was slightly better. She worked weekends. She worked holidays. She worked until her feet ached and her back screamed and her eyes burned with exhaustion. All of it so Shayla could have what she never had: opportunities, a future, a chance. They lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the east side. The heating didn't always work in winter. The air conditioning barely functioned in summer. But the walls were covered with Shayla's achievements. Honor roll certificates. Spelling bee ribbons. A photograph of Shayla at the public library, arms full of books, grinning at the camera. Because Shayla loved to read. She devoured books the way some kids devoured candy. Biographies of Thurgood Marshall and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Novels about kids who changed the world. She told her mother since she was 8 years old that she wanted to be a lawyer, that she wanted to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Judith would smile when Shayla said these things, would cup her daughter's face in her worn hands and say, "Baby, you're going to do it. I know you will. Just remember, being smart isn't enough. You've got to have courage. You've got to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Shayla had nodded, the way children nod at their parents' wisdom, not fully understanding what it means until the moment arrives when you have to live it. And that moment was coming. In about 45 minutes, actually. But right now, Shayla was just trying not to throw up as the plane lifted into the sky. She was flying to Houston to spend the summer with her grandmother, her mother's mother, who had a little house with a garden and made the best peach cobbler in Texas. Judith couldn't afford to take time off work, couldn't afford the plane ticket for herself. But she'd saved for months to send Shayla, had wanted her daughter to have a real summer, not another season of being alone in the apartment while Judith worked. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, Shayla exhaled slowly. She pulled out the book she'd brought, a biography of Constance Baker Motley, and tried to focus on the words. Tried to ignore the fact that she was 30,000 feet in the air, alone, hurtling toward a city she'd never been to. That's when she noticed the woman across the aisle. Florence Adeyemi sat in seat 12C, and there was something about her that made Shayla look twice. She was elegant. That was the word that came to Shayla's mind, though she wasn't entirely sure what made someone elegant. Maybe it was the way Florence held herself, spine straight but not stiff, hands folded gently in her lap. Maybe it was her clothing, simple but clearly well made, a navy blue blouse and tailored pants. Or maybe it was her face, warm brown skin with lines around her eyes that suggested she smiled often, though right now she looked peaceful, almost serene. Florence was reading too. Shayla craned her neck slightly and caught the title. Some technical book about petroleum engineering. Not exactly summer reading material. Florence must have felt Shayla's gaze because she looked up, and her face broke into the kindest smile Shayla had seen since hugging her mother goodbye. Not the smile adults give children when they're being polite. A real smile. Warm. Genuine. Shayla smiled back, shy but grateful for the connection. Florence was 58 years old, though she'd stopped counting birthdays somewhere around 50. She'd been born in Lagos, Nigeria, in a neighborhood where the roads turned to red mud when it rained, where electricity was a luxury, not a given. Her father had been a teacher. Her mother had sold vegetables at the market. They'd had 7 children, and Florence was the youngest, the dreamer, the one who always asked too many questions. When she was 28, Florence had come to America with $300 in her pocket, a student visa, and a fierce determination to build something that mattered. She'd studied at community college while working 3 jobs. She'd slept 4 hours a night. She'd eaten rice and beans for dinner more times than she could count. She'd been laughed at, dismissed, underestimated. And slowly, painfully, she'd built a life. She'd started in the oil industry at the very bottom, working administrative jobs, learning everything she could, saving every penny. She had a gift for understanding systems, for seeing opportunities others missed. Over 30 years, through sheer will and brilliant strategy, she'd climbed higher than anyone expected a Nigerian immigrant woman to climb. Now she worked in the industry. That's what she told people when they asked. Worked in oil and gas. It was technically true. She just left out certain details. Details that would come to matter very soon. Florence was traveling to Houston for business meetings, the kind of meetings that would determine the future of thousands of employees, millions of dollars, entire communities. But you wouldn't know it looking at her. She didn't wear her success like armor. She flew commercial. She dressed simply. She remembered where she came from, remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be considered less than. That memory was about to become very, very relevant. The flight attendant appeared in the aisle, pushing the beverage cart. Her name tag read Amanda Prescott. She was in her mid-40s with blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and an expression that suggested she'd smelled something unpleasant. There was something pinched about her face, something bitter. Amanda worked her way down the aisle, all smiles for some passengers, perfunctory nods for others. When she reached Florence's row, she stopped. Her smile disappeared. "Ma'am," Amanda said, her voice loud enough to carry. "Are you sure you're in the right seat? Economy is in the back." The question landed in the quiet cabin like a slap. Florence looked up from her book, and for just a moment, Shayla saw something flash across her face. Not anger. Something sadder. Recognition. The weariness of someone who'd heard this song before and knew all the words. "I'm in the correct seat," Florence said quietly. She reached into the seat pocket and pulled out her boarding pass, holding it up. "First class. Seat 12C. Her name printed clearly. Amanda's jaw tightened. She glanced at the ticket, and Shayla watched the flight attendant's expression shift. The fake concern disappeared, replaced by something colder. Something uglier. "I see," Amanda said, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Well, the premium meal service is an additional charge. I assume you're aware of that." "I'm aware," Florence said evenly. "I'll just have water, thank you." "Of course," Amanda said, in a tone that suggested Florence's choice confirmed every assumption she'd made. She poured water into a plastic cup, set it down on Florence's tray table with slightly more force than necessary, and moved on. Shayla watched this exchange with growing unease. She was 12, but she wasn't naive. She'd seen this before. The way her mother got followed in stores. The way teachers sometimes acted surprised when Shayla got perfect scores. The way people made assumptions based on nothing but the color of your skin. She looked at Florence, who had returned to her book, her face carefully neutral. But Shayla noticed Florence's hand trembling slightly as she lifted the water to her lips. Across the aisle, a businessman in an expensive suit, Stanley was his name though Shayla didn't know that yet, had watched the whole interaction. He shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable, then deliberately closed his eyes and pretended to sleep. 2 rows back, an elderly white woman looked down at her magazine, suddenly very interested in an article about gardening. No one said anything. No one did anything. And Amanda Prescott, emboldened by the silence, was just getting started. 20 minutes later, Amanda came back through the cabin. Florence had set her water cup on the edge of her tray table while she read. Amanda's cart bumped Florence's armrest just slightly, just enough. The water cup tipped, spilling across the tray table and onto Florence's lap. "Oh my," Amanda said flatly, making no move to help. "How clumsy." Florence stood quickly, water dripping from her pants. Amanda handed her a single napkin. "One. For an entire cup of water." "You really should be more careful," Amanda said, loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. "Some people just aren't used to first-class accommodations." Florence took the napkin without a word and began dabbing at her clothing. Her hands were shaking now, not with fear, but with the effort of containing her anger, her humiliation. Shayla felt something twist in her chest. That hot, burning feeling when you witness injustice. When you see someone being hurt and everything in you screams that it's wrong. But she was 12. She was alone. What could she do? Amanda continued down the aisle, and as she walked, she spoke to another flight attendant, a younger Latina woman named Dominique. Amanda's voice carried, intentionally loud. I don't know why certain people insist on flying first class when they clearly can't handle it. It's uncomfortable for everyone, don't you think? Dominique looked stricken. She glanced at Florence, then back at Amanda, her mouth opening as if to speak. But she said nothing. She was young, probably new, probably scared of losing her job. Florence remained standing, still trying to dry her clothes, and in that moment Shayla saw something that broke her heart. Florence's eyes were wet. Not crying, not quite, but on the edge. This strong, dignified woman was on the verge of tears, not from the spilled water, but from the cruelty, from the public humiliation, from the bone-deep exhaustion of being treated as less than human. And everyone just looked away. Shayla's mother had told her that silence makes you part of the problem. That standing up for what's right matters more than staying comfortable. Those words echoed in her head as she watched Florence, alone in a cabin full of people, fighting to hold on to her dignity. But the worst was still to come. The truly unbelievable part, the part that would eventually make headlines, the part that would change Shayla's life forever, was about to happen. And the question I want you to think about, the question I want you to answer in the comments, is this: what would you have done? If you were sitting on that plane watching this unfold, would you have been one of the people who looked away? Or would you have found the courage to speak up? Remember that question. Because in about 60 seconds, you're going to see what a 12-year-old girl did when faced with that choice. And trust me, you won't believe what happened next. Amanda Prescott returned 30 minutes later, pushing the coffee cart down the aisle with that same tight smile plastered on her face. The cabin had settled into the usual rhythm of a long flight. People reading, watching movies on tiny screens, some already dozing off. The earlier tension had faded into an uncomfortable memory that most passengers were happy to forget. But Amanda hadn't forgotten. And she wasn't finished. She worked her way down the aisle, pouring coffee, offering cream and sugar, making small talk with passengers who responded to her friendliness. When she reached Florence's row, she stopped. That smile twisted into something else entirely. Coffee? Amanda asked, her voice saccharine sweet, dripping with false politeness. Florence looked up from her book. She'd changed her approach, Shayla noticed. Where before she'd been warm and open, now there was a guardedness to her expression. A walls-up defensiveness born from the last hour of targeted cruelty. No, thank you, Florence said quietly. I'm fine with water. Oh, come on, Amanda insisted, leaning closer. Close enough that her voice dropped to a near whisper, but not so quiet that nearby passengers couldn't hear if they were paying attention. You sure you don't want some coffee? Some cream to go with it? There was something in her tone. Something vicious. I'm quite sure, Florence said, her voice steady, but Shayla could hear the strain underneath. Thank you. Amanda straightened up, and for a moment Shayla thought maybe she'd move on. Maybe this would be the end of it. Maybe common decency would prevail. She was wrong. Amanda leaned in even closer, so close that Florence instinctively pulled back. And in a voice that was quiet enough to seem private but loud enough to carry, Amanda said the words that would change everything. You know what your problem is? You're just too dark for first class. The sentence hung in the air like poison gas. Florence's eyes went wide. Several passengers nearby inhaled sharply. Shayla felt her stomach drop. And then Amanda reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out a small container, the kind flight attendants use for coffee creamer. The powdered kind. White powder in a clear plastic container. Amanda held it up, making sure Florence could see it, making sure the passengers around them could see it. Maybe this will help lighten things up, Amanda said. And then she opened the container and dumped it onto Florence's lap. White powder cascaded down, covering Florence's navy blue pants, dusting her hands, speckling her blouse. The powder spread across the fabric like snow, like ash, like a physical manifestation of every racist assumption, every cruel stereotype, every dehumanizing belief that Amanda Prescott carried in her hateful heart. There we go, Amanda said, her voice filled with mock satisfaction. Much better. And then she laughed. She actually laughed. A sharp, brittle sound that cut through the cabin. She turned to another flight attendant, a woman named Janet who'd been watching with mounting horror, and Amanda laughed as if she'd just told the funniest joke in the world. Florence sat frozen. Completely frozen. Her hands hovered above her lap, white powder covering her fingers, her carefully pressed pants now ruined, her dignity shattered in front of dozens of strangers. Her mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. What words could possibly address this level of cruelty? The cabin fell into a horrible, suffocating silence. Passengers had gasped when it happened. A collective sharp intake of breath, that instinctive reaction to witnessing something shocking. But now they sat in stunned silence. Some stared. Most looked away. The businessman, Stanley, pressed his lips together and stared hard at his laptop screen, suddenly fascinated by a spreadsheet. The elderly woman brought her hand to her mouth but didn't speak. No one moved. No one said anything. No one did a damn thing. Amanda walked away, still chuckling, pushing her cart down the aisle as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just publicly humiliated another human being. Janet followed behind her, looking back at Florence with an expression of shock and pity, but still saying nothing, still complicit in her silence. Florence's hands began to tremble. She tried to brush the powder off her lap, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely function. The powder scattered, some falling to the floor, some clinging stubbornly to the fabric. Her breathing had gone shallow and quick. And then a single tear rolled down her cheek. Just one. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold the rest back, trying to maintain some shred of dignity, but that one tear escaped and traced a path down her face. Florence Adeyemi, who had come to America with nothing and built an empire through sheer determination. Florence Adeyemi, who had faced down boardrooms full of men who underestimated her. Florence Adeyemi, who had survived poverty and prejudice and every obstacle the world threw at her. This strong, accomplished, dignified woman sat in seat 12C with white powder covering her lap and tears threatening to fall, utterly alone in a cabin full of people. And across the aisle, Shayla Morrison watched. She felt like she couldn't breathe. Her chest was tight, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She was 12 years old. Well, just a kid on her way to visit her grandmother. What could she possibly do? She had no power here. No authority. She was surrounded by adults, people who should be handling this, people who should be standing up, and they were all just sitting there. What could one child do against a grown woman, against the system, against the crushing weight of everyone else's silence? Shayla's mind raced. She thought about her mother, probably at work right now, probably checking on a patient, probably exhausted but pushing through because that's what Judith Morrison did. She pushed through. She stood up. She taught Shayla to do the same. Silence makes you part of the problem, baby, her mother had said 1,000 times. If you see something wrong and you don't speak up, you're helping the person doing wrong. You're telling them it's okay. You understand me? Shayla had always nodded. Of course she understood. In theory. But theory is different than practice. Theory doesn't make your hands shake. Theory doesn't make your throat tight with fear. Theory doesn't make you feel like you might throw up from anxiety. She looked at Florence, at this woman who'd done nothing wrong except exist in a space where someone decided she didn't belong. Florence was still trying to clean the powder off, still fighting to hold back tears, still so utterly alone. And Shayla made a decision. Her hands moved to her seatbelt before her brain fully caught up with what she was doing. The buckle clicked open. She stood up, her legs feeling shaky beneath her. For a second she just stood there in the aisle, her heart hammering, wondering if she was really going to do this. Then she started walking. The few steps to Florence's row felt like miles. Each step was a choice. Each step was a commitment. Each step meant there was no going back. Passengers watched her with confusion. This little girl walking down the aisle while everyone else sat frozen. Shayla reached Florence's seat and stopped. Florence looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, surprised to see this child standing there. Up close, Shayla could see the powder dusting Florence's eyelashes, could see the trembling in her jaw as she fought to maintain composure. "Excuse me, ma'am," Shayla said, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I have some napkins. And my sweater. You can use them." She pulled off her cardigan, her favorite one with the little flowers embroidered on the pocket that her grandmother had given her last Christmas, and held it out. From her backpack, she grabbed the travel pack of tissues her mother had insisted she bring. Florence stared at these offerings, at this child's small hands holding out help, and something in her face cracked. Not broke but softened. The tears she'd been holding back threatened to spill over again, but this time not from humiliation. From the sheer unexpected kindness of it. "Sweetheart, you don't have to," Florence started, her voice thick. "I know I don't have to," Shayla interrupted, surprising herself with her firmness. She pressed the sweater and tissues into Florence's hands. "But I want to. What that lady did was wrong." And then Shayla turned around. She turned to face the rest of first class, these adults who'd sat silent while cruelty unfolded before their eyes. She raised her voice, much louder than before, loud enough that there was no way anyone could pretend they didn't hear. "Excuse me, ma'am," she called out. "I saw what happened. That was wrong. Really wrong." Heads turned. People who'd been studiously ignoring the situation suddenly found themselves unable to look away from this 12-year-old girl standing in the aisle, calling out injustice. Amanda had stopped at the front of the cabin. She turned around, her face registering surprise then irritation. She started walking back toward them. Shayla's heart felt like it might burst out of her chest, but she held her ground. She thought about her mother, thought about all those nights Judith came home exhausted but still found time to help Shayla with homework, to teach her right from wrong, to show her what courage looked like. Amanda reached them, her face flushed red, her eyes hard. "Little girl, you need to return to your seat right now." "Not until I say what I need to say," Shayla replied, and she was amazed her voice didn't shake. "My mama taught me something. She taught me that people who hurt others are just hurting inside themselves. That when someone is cruel, it's because they're in pain, because something is broken in them, not in the person they're hurting." Shayla looked directly at Amanda, at this woman who was probably somebody's mother, somebody's daughter, somebody who'd somehow learned to carry this much hatred. "I feel sorry for you," Shayla said quietly. "I really do. Because you're going to go home tonight and you're going to have to live with yourself, knowing what you did. And that must be really, really hard." The words landed like a punch. Amanda's face went from red to almost purple. Her mouth opened and closed, and for a moment she seemed too shocked to speak. The cabin was dead silent. Every single person was watching now. "How dare you?" Amanda finally sputtered. "How dare you speak to me that way? Little girl, get back to your seat before I have you removed from this flight. Do you understand me? I will call security the moment we land and have you detained." But Shayla didn't move. Didn't flinch. "I'm going to report you when we land," Shayla said, her voice steady now, stronger. "I'm going to tell them exactly what you did. What you said. How you treated this woman." Amanda laughed, but it was a harsh sound, brittle and forced. "You? A child? Who's going to believe you? You think anyone cares what a kid says? You think your word means anything?" She stepped closer to Shayla, looming over her, using her adult size to intimidate. "You're being disruptive. You're out of your seat during service. I could have you banned from this airline. I could make sure your family never flies with us again. Is that what you want?" Shayla felt fear spike through her. Real fear. This woman had power. This woman could make her life difficult. Could get her in trouble. And then Shayla remembered something else. She'd been nervous on the flight, anxious, so she'd pulled out her phone earlier to text her mom that she was okay. The phone was still in her hand, tucked against her side. She'd been recording. She'd started recording the moment she stood up, some instinct telling her she might need proof of what was happening. The phone had been in her hand, camera facing forward, capturing everything. Amanda's threats. Her cruel words. All of it. Shayla lifted her phone slightly, just enough so Amanda could see the screen. The red recording indicator blinked steadily. "I have a video," Shayla said quietly. "Of everything you just said. Everything you did." Amanda's face went white. Actually white. The color drained so fast it was almost comical. Her eyes fixed on that little red recording light, and Shayla watched the flight attendant's confidence crumble in real time. You can't." Amanda stammered. "I can," Shayla said. "And I did." There was movement behind Amanda. Dominique, the younger flight attendant who'd looked so troubled earlier, finally stepped forward. Her voice was soft but clear. "Amanda, maybe we should call the captain. Maybe we should. This has gone too far. Way too far." Amanda whirled on her. "You stay out of this, Dominique. This is none of your business." "It is my business," Dominique said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm crew on this flight. I've watched you harass this passenger for the past hour. I've watched you discriminate against her, humiliate her, and now threaten a child. I can't. I won't stay quiet anymore." Amanda looked around wildly, seeming to realize for the first time that she'd lost control of the situation. That the silence that had protected her earlier was breaking apart. Florence reached up and gently touched Shayla's arm. "Sweetheart, thank you. You're so brave. But I don't want you getting in trouble for me. Please sit down. I'll handle this." Shayla looked down at Florence, at this woman who even now, covered in white powder and humiliation, was trying to protect a child she'd just met. And Shayla shook her head. "You shouldn't have to handle this alone," Shayla said. "Nobody should." And that's when Stanley spoke up. The businessman in the expensive suit, the one who'd pretended to sleep through everything, suddenly stood up. His voice was firm, authoritative, the voice of someone used to being heard. "I saw everything," Stanley said loudly. From the beginning. I watched this flight attendant target this passenger without cause. I watched her spill water deliberately. I watched her dump powder on this woman and make racist comments. The girl is telling the truth. Every word. An older woman, the one who'd looked away earlier, stood up next. Her voice quavered but held steady. I saw it too. I'm ashamed I didn't speak up sooner, but I saw everything. That flight attendant, Amanda, she was cruel and discriminatory. Deliberately so. Another passenger called out, I recorded part of it too. I have video. And another, I'll give a statement when we land. One by one, passengers who'd sat silent started speaking up. Not all of them. Some still looked away, uncomfortable, unwilling to get involved even now. But enough. Enough people found their voices that Amanda Prescott suddenly found herself very alone. She looked around at the faces staring at her with disgust and condemnation. Looked at Dominique, who stood with her arms crossed, no longer willing to be silent. Looked at Shayla, this little girl who'd somehow started an avalanche just by having the courage to stand up. Amanda's face twisted with rage and something else. Fear. She realized what she'd done, what this would mean for her job, her career. And instead of apologizing, instead of showing any remorse, she did what cowards do. She ran. She turned and stormed toward the back of the plane, shoving past Janet who'd been watching with growing horror. The curtain to the galley slammed shut behind her. For a moment, no one moved. Then the intercom crackled to life. The captain's voice, calm but serious, filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been made aware of a disturbance in the cabin. We take the safety and dignity of all our passengers extremely seriously. The incident will be fully investigated upon landing, and appropriate authorities will be notified. We apologize for any discomfort this has caused. Flight attendants, please report to the galley immediately. Dominique gave Florence and Shayla a quick, sympathetic look before hurrying toward the back. The cabin buzzed with whispered conversations. People were pulling out phones, texting, posting on social media. This was going to be news before they even landed. Florence slowly stood up. She still had white powder covering her clothes, but something had changed in her bearing. She wasn't shrunken anymore. Wasn't diminished. She looked at Shayla with such profound gratitude that it made Shayla's eyes sting. What's your name, young lady? Florence asked softly. Shayla. Shayla Morrison. Shayla Morrison, Florence repeated as if committing it to memory. I'm Florence. Florence Adeyemi. She held out her hand and Shayla shook it, feeling the warmth and strength in Florence's grip. Thank you doesn't seem like enough for what you just did. You stood up when no one else would. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how much courage that took? Shayla shrugged, suddenly feeling shy now that the adrenaline was wearing off. My mama always says silence makes you part of the problem. I couldn't sit there and not do anything. Florence smiled, a real smile now, warm and genuine despite the powder still dusting her clothes. Your mama sounds like a very wise woman. You must tell me about her. They sat down, Shayla in the empty seat next to Florence since no one was going to enforce assigned seating at this point. And for the rest of the flight they talked. Florence asked about Shayla's life, and Shayla found herself telling the stranger things she rarely shared. About how her mother worked so hard. About their small apartment and big dreams. About how Shayla loved to read, how she wanted to be a lawyer someday, how she wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves. That's a beautiful dream, Florence said. The world needs more people like you, Shayla. People who see injustice and don't look away. What about you? Shayla asked. What do you do? Florence smiled, a mysterious little smile. I work in business. The oil industry. Like engineering? Shayla asked, remembering the book Florence had been reading. Something like that, Florence said vaguely. It's not that interesting, really. I much prefer hearing about you. Tell me more about these books you love to read. So Shayla did. She talked about Thurgood Marshall and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, about the civil rights cases that changed America, about how she wanted to be part of that legacy. And Florence listened with genuine interest, asking questions, encouraging her, treating her like her dreams mattered. As the plane began its descent into Houston, Florence pulled out a business card from her purse. It was simple, elegant. Just a name and phone number. I want you to stay in touch, Shayla, Florence said, pressing the card into her hand. Will you do that? Will you let me know how you're doing? I'd very much like to follow your journey. Shayla took the card, reading the name. Florence Adeyemi. No company name. No title. Just the name and number. I will, Shayla promised. And you're okay? After everything that happened? Florence touched Shayla's cheek gently. Sweetheart, I've survived much worse than Amanda Prescott. I've faced discrimination my entire life. It hurts, yes. Every single time. But you know what? Today reminded me of something important. It reminded me that goodness exists. That courage exists. That there are people like you in the world who will stand up when it matters. She held Shayla's hand as the plane landed, as if drawing strength from this child who defended her. I won't forget what you did today, Florence said quietly as they taxied to the gate. I promise you that, Shayla Morrison. I won't ever forget. Shayla smiled, not knowing what those words would mean. Not understanding that this moment, this connection, was about to change the entire trajectory of her life in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. Because Florence Adeyemi kept her promises. Always. And 3 months later, Shayla Morrison would open a letter that would make her and her mother cry tears of joy and disbelief. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now, as the plane pulled up to the gate, as airport security boarded to escort Amanda Prescott off the plane, as other passengers patted Shayla on the back and thanked her for her courage, as Florence gathered her things with dignity restored, right now, in this moment, justice felt possible. And sometimes that's all we need. Just the possibility of justice. Just one person willing to stand up. Just one moment of courage that ripples outward in ways we can't predict. So here's my question for you, and I really want you to think about this, to answer honestly in the comments below. When have you stayed silent when you should have spoken up? We've all done it. We've all had that moment where we saw something wrong and fear kept us quiet. What was that moment for you? And what would you do differently now after hearing Shayla's story? Think about that. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you what courage looks like, hit that subscribe button. Because we need more stories like this. We need more reminders that one person, even a child, can make a difference when they refuse to be silent. The plane door opened and Houston's humid air rushed into the cabin. But no one moved toward the exit. Because standing at the jetway entrance were 4 airport security officers, their expressions serious, their radios crackling with static. Behind them stood a woman in a crisp navy suit, her identification badge marking her as airport management. Her face was set in that particular expression people wear when they know something serious has happened and they're determined to handle it properly. The passengers sat in tense silence, watching as the security team boarded the aircraft. Amanda Prescott had emerged from the galley, and the moment she saw them, her face went through a remarkable transformation. The fear and anger from earlier disappeared, replaced by a mask of professional concern. She smoothed her hair, straightened her uniform, and walked toward the officers with her chin up. Shayla watched from her seat next to Florence, her stomach churning. Part of her wondered if somehow she was the one in trouble. She was just a kid after all. Amanda was an adult and authority figure. What if they believed her version of events? The woman in the navy suit, her name tag read Anaya Rodriguez, airport operations manager, stepped forward. Her voice was calm but carried authority. I'm going to need several people to remain on the aircraft for a few moments while we sort out what happened during this flight. Amanda Prescott, you'll need to come with us. I also need to speak with. She consulted her tablet, Florence Adeyemi and Shayla Morrison. Amanda's mask slipped for just a second, revealing the panic underneath. But she recovered quickly, plastering on a concerned expression that would have been convincing if you hadn't witnessed what she'd done. Of course I'm happy to cooperate, Amanda said, her voice taking on a tone of wounded professionalism. Though I must say, I'm concerned about how this is being handled. I was assaulted during this flight by an aggressive passenger, and when I attempted to maintain order, a child became verbally abusive toward me. I hope you'll take my safety concerns seriously. Shayla felt her mouth drop open. Assaulted? Abusive? Was Amanda actually going to lie right now in front of all these witnesses? Apparently yes. Yes, she was. The child, Amanda continued, gesturing toward Shayla without actually looking at her, became extremely confrontational when I asked her to return to her seat during beverage service. She used threatening language and created a disturbance that frightened other passengers. I did my best to de-escalate, but she was quite aggressive for someone so young. The sheer audacity of it left Shayla momentarily speechless. Florence, however, stood up slowly, and there was something in her bearing that made even the security officers pay attention. That is not what happened, Florence said quietly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Not even remotely. Before Amanda could respond, Stanley rose from his seat. I recorded part of the incident, he said, pulling out his phone. I have video evidence of what actually occurred. This flight attendant is lying. The elderly woman stood next. I witnessed everything. That flight attendant targeted this woman from the moment she sat down. Made racist comments. Deliberately spilled water on her. And then. She paused, her voice shaking with emotion. Then she dumped white powder on her and made a comment about her skin color. It was the most appalling thing I've seen in my 68 years of flying. Another passenger chimed in. I have video too. Clear audio of what the flight attendant said. And another, I'll give a full statement. That woman, Amanda, she was deliberately cruel. Racist. The child didn't do anything wrong. She stood up for someone being abused. Dominique stepped forward from behind Amanda. The young flight attendant's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. I need to make a statement, Dominique said. I work with Amanda. I've worked with her for 6 months. And I need to tell you the truth about what happened on this flight. Amanda whirled on her. Dominique, don't you dare. I watched Amanda Prescott harass Ms. Adeyemi for over an hour, Dominique said, speaking faster now as if afraid she'd lose her nerve. She made discriminatory comments about her race. She questioned whether she could afford first class. She deliberately spilled water on her. She made loud comments about certain people not belonging in first class. And then she dumped coffee creamer powder on Ms. Adeyemi's lap and said, maybe this will help lighten things up. I heard it clearly. Multiple passengers heard it. It was racist. It was cruel. And it was absolutely unprovoked. Dominique's voice cracked slightly. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have stopped her. I was scared of losing my job, scared of retaliation, and I stayed silent while a passenger was abused. I'll never forgive myself for that. But I'm not staying silent anymore. Amanda Prescott deliberately discriminated against a passenger based on her race, and this 12-year-old girl had more courage than any of us adults. She's the only one who stood up immediately. The color had drained from Amanda's face again. She looked around wildly, seeking support, finding none. Even Janet, the other flight attendant who'd laughed with her earlier, was conspicuously silent, her face pale and her eyes on the floor. Anaya Rodriguez had been taking notes on her tablet throughout all of this. She looked up, her expression grave. Amanda Prescott, you're being immediately removed from duty pending a full investigation. You'll need to surrender your crew identification and come with security. We'll be conducting interviews with all witnesses, reviewing any video evidence and coordinating with the airline's corporate office. If these allegations are substantiated, and based on what I'm hearing they will be, you'll face termination and potential legal action. You can't do this, Amanda sputtered. I have rights. I have a union. You can't just believe. We have multiple eyewitness accounts, Anaya interrupted firmly. We have video evidence. We have a crew member corroborating the passenger's version of events. And we have our own company policies that explicitly prohibit discrimination and abuse of passengers. Yes, Miss Prescott, I absolutely can do this. Officers, please escort her to the security office. The security officers moved forward. Amanda tried to argue, tried to spin more lies, but her voice was drowned out by passengers who started speaking over her, insisting their statements be heard, making sure the truth was documented. As Amanda was led away, still protesting, Anaya turned to Florence and Shayla. Her expression softened considerably. Ms. Adeyemi, I cannot apologize enough for what you experienced on this flight. This is absolutely not representative of our airline's values or standards. What happened to you was unconscionable, and we will be conducting a thorough review of our hiring and training practices. I'd like to take your full statement, and I want to assure you that we'll be following up personally to discuss how we can make this right. Florence nodded graciously. I appreciate that, Ms. Rodriguez. I truly do. But if you're looking for someone to commend, someone to recognize, it's not me. She placed her hand on Shayla's shoulder. This young lady is the one who deserves your attention. She's 12 years old, traveling alone, and she had the courage to stand up when every adult in that cabin stayed silent. She risked getting in trouble, risked being kicked off the flight, risked everything to defend a stranger. That's remarkable. That's what your airline should be celebrating. Anaya looked at Shayla with genuine admiration. Is that true? You stood up to a flight attendant? Shayla nodded, suddenly feeling shy again with all these eyes on her. My mama taught me to speak up when something's wrong, she said quietly. Miss Florence didn't deserve to be treated like that. Nobody does. Your mother raised you right, Anaya said warmly. She pulled out a business card. I'd like to get your contact information, Shayla. The airline will definitely want to follow up with you. And just between us, I think you're going to be hearing some very positive things from our corporate office. As Anaya collected statements from Shayla, Florence, and several of the other passengers, word had spread through the airport. A news reporter, Maria Chen from a local Houston station, had caught wind that something significant had happened on the flight. She appeared at the gate with a cameraman, microphone in hand, eyes sharp with that journalistic instinct for a story. "Excuse me," Maria called out, spotting Florence and Shayla. "I'm hearing there was an incident of discrimination on this flight. Would either of you be willing to give a statement?" Florence immediately stepped in front of Shayla, blocking the camera's view of the child. Her voice was polite but firm. "We appreciate your interest, but we won't be giving statements at this time. This young lady needs to get to her family, and I need to respect her privacy. She's a minor and she's been through enough today." "But surely the public has a right to know," Maria started. "The public's right to know doesn't supersede a child's right to privacy," Florence said, her tone brooking no argument. "Now if you'll excuse us." She kept herself between Shayla and the camera, guiding the girl through the terminal with a protective hand on her shoulder. Florence moved with the kind of confidence that made people naturally step aside, and within minutes, they'd navigated through the crowd to the arrivals area where Shayla's grandmother was waiting. The moment Shayla saw her grandmother, tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. Her grandmother, a woman in her 70s with the same warm eyes as Judith, rushed forward and wrapped Shayla in a tight hug. "Baby girl, what happened?" "The airline called and said there was some kind of incident." Florence stepped forward, introducing herself, explaining briefly what had happened and how brave Shayla had been. Shayla's grandmother listened with growing pride and concern, holding her granddaughter close. "You're sure you're okay, baby?" she asked Shayla. "I'm okay, Grandma," Shayla said, wiping her eyes. "Just tired." Florence exchanged contact information with Shayla's grandmother, making sure Shayla had her number, promising to stay in touch. As they parted ways, Florence hugged Shayla one more time. "Remember what I said," Florence whispered. "I won't forget what you did today. That's a promise." Shayla nodded, not fully understanding the weight of those words. She was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, ready to just get to her grandmother's house and sleep for about 12 hours. But while Shayla rested, the story was just beginning to spread. 3 days later, Stanley, the businessman who'd finally spoken up on the plane, posted about the incident on LinkedIn. Stanley was a senior vice president at a Fortune 500 company with over 50,000 followers. His post was detailed, passionate, and brutally honest about his own initial cowardice and staying silent. "Today I want to tell you about a 12-year-old girl who taught me what courage looks like," his post began. It went on to describe everything that had happened, praising Shayla's bravery while calling out his own failure to act immediately. He didn't name Shayla or Florence, respecting their privacy, but he named Amanda Prescott and the airline, demanding accountability. The post went viral within hours. It was shared thousands of times. Major news outlets picked it up. Someone created the hashtag Justice for Florence, and it started trending nationally. Other passengers from the flight began sharing their own accounts, their own videos, their own shame at not acting sooner. The airline, facing mounting public pressure and a PR nightmare, released a statement within 24 hours. "We are aware of the disturbing incident that occurred on Flight 2847. The employee in question, Amanda Prescott, has been terminated effective immediately. We are conducting a comprehensive review of our hiring practices and implementing mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff. Discrimination in any form is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. We are reaching out to the affected passenger to discuss remediation, and we commend the young passenger who demonstrated extraordinary courage and character." The media, predictably, wanted more. They wanted interviews with Florence. They wanted her story. They tried to track her down through public records, through business directories, through any means they could think of. They found nothing. Florence Adeyemi, it turned out, was intensely private. She had no social media presence. Her company didn't list her personal information publicly. She declined all interview requests through a very professional and very firm spokesperson. Within a week, unable to get the story they wanted from Florence herself, the media attention began to die down. But in Detroit, Shayla Morrison became something of a local celebrity. Her school principal called her into his office when she returned from summer break, not to reprimand her but to commend her. He'd heard about what happened from Judith, who'd heard from Shayla's grandmother, and he told Shayla how proud the school was to have her as a student. Local news stations requested interviews. Shayla, on her mother's advice, declined most of them. Judith was protective of her daughter, didn't want her exploited, didn't want the attention to go to her head or become a burden. Shayla did do one interview with a local community newspaper, brief and humble, where she simply said she'd done what anyone should do, what her mother had taught her to do. That article got shared around Detroit, and for a few weeks, people recognized Shayla. Neighbors congratulated her. Strangers at the grocery store thanked her. Teachers at school treated her with extra warmth. But as summer faded into fall, as the leaves turned golden and then brown, as the attention moved on to the next viral story and the next outrage, life returned to normal. Shayla started 8th grade. She kept her head down, maintained her excellent grades, continued to be the quiet, studious girl she'd always been. The incident on the plane became a story she'd tell sometimes, a moment that shaped her but didn't define her. Judith Morrison continued working her double shifts. If anything, she worked even harder, her worry about college costs intensifying as Shayla got older. They'd sit at their small kitchen table on Judith's rare nights off, looking at college websites, calculating costs, feeling overwhelmed by numbers that seemed impossible. "Maybe I can go to community college first," Shayla would suggest. "Save money, then transfer." "No, baby," Judith would say firmly. "You're going to a good school. A school that recognizes your potential. We'll figure it out. Scholarships, loans, whatever it takes." But privately, Judith lay awake at night doing math that never quite added up. Even with scholarships, even with financial aid, college was expensive. And Shayla deserved the best education possible. Deserved opportunities Judith never had. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on Judith like a physical thing. Shayla, mature beyond her years, understood her mother's worry even when Judith tried to hide it. So Shayla studied harder. Took on a part-time tutoring job at 13, helping younger kids with reading and math, saving every penny for college. She applied for every scholarship she could find. She researched schools with the best financial aid packages. She was determined to make this work, to not let her mother's sacrifices be in vain. The months passed. Summer's heat gave way to autumn's cool, then winter's bitter cold. Detroit's snow piled up on the streets, the kind of relentless winter that made everything harder, every commute longer, every day more exhausting. Shayla sometimes thought about Florence. Wondered if she was okay. Wondered if the incident had affected her beyond that one day. She checked the news occasionally, typed Florence's name into Google, but found almost nothing. A few mentions of someone named Florence Adeyemi in oil industry publications, but no photos, no personal information, nothing that told her anything real about the woman she'd defended. Shayla assumed Florence had moved on with her life. Had probably forgotten about the girl who stood up for her on a plane. And that was okay. Shayla hadn't done it for recognition or reward. She'd done it because it was right. The incident had changed her, though. Made her more aware of injustice, more conscious of when people stayed silent in the face of wrong. It had shown her that courage was possible, that one person could make a difference, even a person with no power, no authority, no special status. It became part of who she was. One of those defining moments that shapes your character, that becomes part of your foundation. When Shayla wrote her college essays months later, she'd write about that day. Not bragging but reflecting on what it taught her about moral courage, about the cost of silence, about standing up even when you're scared. But she didn't expect anything to come from it. Didn't expect the connection with Florence to continue. How could it? Florence was an adult with a busy life, probably living in Houston or somewhere else far from Detroit. It had been a moment, important and meaningful, but just a moment. 3 months after the incident, Shayla had long stopped checking for news about Florence. The story had faded from public consciousness. The hashtag stopped trending. The airline implemented its policy changes and moved on. Amanda Prescott had been fired, had tried to sue for wrongful termination and lost, and had disappeared from public view. Life continued its normal rhythm. School, homework, tutoring job, time with her mother, applications and planning and dreaming about a future that seemed both exciting and impossibly far away. Shayla had no idea that Florence Adeyemi hadn't forgotten. Hadn't moved on. Had in fact been thinking about that 12-year-old girl nearly every day for 3 months. Had been making plans. Big plans. Life-changing plans. Had been preparing something that would arrive in Shayla Morrison's mailbox on a cold December morning, in an official-looking envelope with a Houston return address, containing words that would make Shayla and her mother cry for entirely different reasons than they'd cried before. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because right now, in late November, Shayla Morrison was just a 13-year-old girl doing her homework at the kitchen table, helping her exhausted mother prepare dinner, dreaming about college and law school and making a difference in the world, having no idea that her act of courage was about to be repaid in ways she never could have imagined. Sometimes the universe takes a while to balance the scales. Sometimes justice moves slowly. Sometimes the reward for doing right comes not immediately, but exactly when you need it most. And Shayla Morrison, who stood up when no one else would, who defended a stranger without expecting anything in return, who showed the world what courage looks like in a 12-year-old body, was about to discover that some people, some very successful and very grateful people, never forget a debt. Florence Adeyemi had made a promise. "I won't forget what you did today." And Florence Adeyemi always kept her promises. So let me ask you this, and I want you to really think about your answer because it matters. Have you ever done something good, something right, without expecting anything in return, and then been surprised when the universe found a way to reward you? Share your story in the comments. Because we need to hear more stories about kindness being repaid, about courage being recognized, about doing the right thing even when it costs you something. And if you believe in stories like this, if you believe the world needs more Shaylas and more people willing to stand up, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next, what arrives in that envelope 3 months after a girl defended a stranger on a plane, will restore your faith in humanity. I promise you that. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in early December, when Detroit was buried under 6 inches of fresh snow and the temperature hadn't risen above 15 degrees in a week. Judith Morrison was getting ready for her shift at the hospital, moving through their small apartment with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd perfected the art of functioning on too little sleep. Shayla was at the kitchen table, already dressed for school, working on calculus homework that was technically meant for high school students but that her teacher had given her because she'd mastered the 8th grade curriculum by October. The mail had come early. Judith grabbed it on her way to make coffee, shuffling through the usual bills and junk mail with barely a glance. But then she stopped. There was an envelope. Heavy cream-colored paper. Expensive looking. The kind of envelope that suggested whatever was inside mattered. The return address was printed in elegant script. Adeyemi Foundation, Houston, Texas. Judith stared at it for a long moment. That name. Adeyemi. Florence Adeyemi. The woman from the plane. The woman Shayla had defended 3 months ago. "Shayla," Judith called out, her voice tight with something Shayla couldn't quite identify. Not fear exactly but close to it. "Baby, come here." Shayla looked up from her homework, saw her mother standing frozen by the counter, holding an envelope like it might explode. "What is it, Mama?" I think it's from that woman. From the plane. Florence." Shayla's heart jumped. She hadn't heard from Florence since that day at the Houston airport. She'd assumed, as the months passed, that Florence had moved on with her life. That the promise to stay in touch had been one of those kind things adults say in the moment but don't actually mean. "Should we open it?" Shayla asked, coming to stand next to her mother. Judith looked at her daughter, at this remarkable girl she'd raised against every odd, and nodded. Together. She carefully opened the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a letter, multiple pages, typed on heavy letterhead that matched the envelope. At the top was a logo, a stylized flame above the words, Adeyemi Foundation. Judith began to read aloud, her voice shaking. "Dear Ms. Morrison and Shayla, I hope this letter finds you both well. I am writing to you 3 months after our encounter on Flight 2847, an experience that has remained with me every single day since. Allow me to properly introduce myself as I was not entirely forthcoming when we met. My name is Florence Adeyemi, and I am the founder and CEO of Adeyemi Petroleum International." Judith stopped reading. Just stopped, her eyes fixed on those words. "CEO. Petroleum International. Mama?" Shayla asked quietly. "What does that mean?" Judith's hands were shaking so badly now that the paper rattled. She continued reading, her voice barely above a whisper. "Adeyemi Petroleum International is one of the largest black-owned oil companies in America. We operate in 15 states, employ over 3,000 people, and generate annual revenues exceeding $1.8 billion. I am telling you this not to boast, but to provide context for what comes next. 30 years ago, I came to America from Nigeria with $300, a student visa, and a dream. I worked 3 jobs while attending community college. I slept in my car some nights because I couldn't afford both rent and tuition. I faced discrimination at every turn, people who looked at my skin and my accent and decided I was worth less, capable of less, deserving of less. But someone helped me. A professor who saw potential when others saw only an obstacle. She paid for my books 1 semester when I couldn't afford them. She connected me with internships when companies wouldn't interview me. She believed in me when I barely believed in myself. I built my company from a single gas station I purchased with a loan that 17 banks rejected before one finally approved. I grew it slowly and painfully into what it is today. And 10 years ago, when I had more money than I'd ever dreamed possible, I started the Adeyemi Foundation. The foundation's mission is simple: to provide opportunities to young people who demonstrate something that cannot be taught in any classroom: moral courage. I travel commercially, Shayla. Even though I own private planes. Even though I could isolate myself in luxury and never face discrimination again. I travel commercially because I never want to forget where I came from. I never want to lose touch with the reality that most people live. I never want to become so comfortable that I stop seeing injustice. That day on the plane I was tired. I had just left meetings where I'd made decisions affecting millions of dollars and thousands of jobs. I was thinking about profit margins and expansion strategies. And then a flight attendant dumped white powder on my lap and reminded me viscerally that no matter how successful I become, there will always be people who see only my skin color. I was prepared to endure it quietly. To document it, report it, move on. I've faced worse. I've survived worse. I know how to protect myself. But then a 12-year-old girl stood up. A child, traveling alone with no power and no protection, stood up and said, "This is wrong," when every adult in that cabin stayed silent. Shayla, you didn't know who I was. You had no idea whether helping me would benefit you in any way. You stood up purely because it was right. Because someone was being hurt and you refused to be a bystander. That is remarkable. That is rare. That is exactly the quality my foundation was created to nurture and reward. Which brings me to the purpose of this letter. Judith's voice broke. She had to stop, take a shuddering breath, wipe her eyes. Shayla was gripping her mother's arm, her own eyes wide, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Mama, what does it say?" Shayla whispered. Judith continued, tears now streaming openly down her face. The Adeyemi Foundation is offering Shayla Morrison a full scholarship for her undergraduate education. This scholarship includes complete tuition coverage at any accredited four-year university in the United States, full housing expenses whether on campus or off campus, a yearly stipend for books, supplies, and living expenses, access to our mentorship program, connecting you with leaders in law, business, and public service, summer internship opportunities at Adeyemi Petroleum International and our partner companies, professional development workshops and networking events, additional funding for graduate school if you maintain a 3.5 GPA or higher. This is not a loan. This does not need to be repaid. This is an investment in your future because you've already demonstrated that you possess something far more valuable than academic excellence. You possess character. Shayla, you defended a stranger when no one else would. You stood up against injustice despite being afraid. You risked consequences to do what was right. These are the qualities of a true leader. These are the qualities that change the world. Your mother raised you right. Let me help ensure you both get the future you deserve. I have enclosed information about the scholarship program, testimonials from previous recipients, and contact information for my foundation director who will guide you through the process. I've also included my personal phone number. Please call me. I would very much like to speak with you both. With profound respect and gratitude, Florence Adeyemi, founder and CEO, Adeyemi Petroleum International founder, the Adeyemi Foundation. The letter fell from Judith's hands. She just stood there in their tiny kitchen with its ancient refrigerator and the crack in the ceiling tile they'd been meaning to fix for 2 years, and she broke down. Not polite tears. Not quiet crying. She broke down, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body, and she sank into a chair and buried her face in her hands and wept. Shayla had never seen her mother cry like this. Her strong, unbreakable mother who worked double shifts and never complained, who smiled through exhaustion and fear, who'd held their lives together through sheer force of will. Shayla didn't know what to do. She wrapped her arms around Judith's shoulders and held on tight while her mother cried. "It's okay, Mama," Shayla whispered. "It's okay. She's giving you college," Judith gasped between sobs. "She's giving you everything. Everything I've been so scared I couldn't give you. All those nights I lay awake doing math that didn't work, trying to figure out how to make it happen. And she's just giving it to you." Judith looked up at her daughter, her face wet with tears, and she cupped Shayla's face in her hands the way she had when Shayla was small. "Do you understand what this means, baby? Do you understand? You can go anywhere. Any school. You don't have to choose based on money. You can choose based on what's best for you. You can become anything you want to be. Anything." Shayla was crying now too, the magnitude of it hitting her in waves. College had been this looming stress, this impossible mountain they'd have to climb somehow. She'd been preparing herself for community college, for working through school, for loans and debt and years of paying it back. She'd been ready to do it, willing to do it, but scared of what it would cost. And now this woman, this stranger she'd defended for 2 minutes on a plane, was handing her the future like a gift. Is it real? Shayla asked. Is this really real? Judith picked up the letter again with shaking hands, reading through it again, examining the letterhead, the foundation information, everything. Then she pulled out her phone and typed in Adeyemi Petroleum International. The results made her gasp again. There were news articles, financial reports, business profiles, and photos. Photos of Florence Adeyemi at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, at charity events, at industry conferences. Florence in business suits, looking powerful and composed. Headlines about her as one of the most successful black entrepreneurs in America. Articles about her foundation, which had provided over $50 million in scholarships over the past decade. Oh my God, Judith whispered. Shayla, she's a billionaire. She's actually a billionaire, and you defended her on a plane without knowing, and she's giving you a full scholarship to anywhere you want to go. They sat there in stunned silence for a long moment, just trying to process this information that had arrived with the morning mail and upended their entire world. Finally, Judith looked at the letter again, at the phone number written at the bottom in what looked like Florence's own handwriting. Should we call? Judith asked. What if it's a scam? What if someone is using her name, pretending to be her? There's one way to find out, Shayla said, her voice steadier than she felt. Judith nodded. She picked up her phone, her hands still trembling, and dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Judith was preparing herself for voicemail, for a secretary, for layers of bureaucracy between them and the truth. But then someone answered. And the voice that came through the phone was warm, familiar, and unmistakably Florence. Hello. Judith's voice came out as barely a whisper. Ms. Adeyemi? Yes, this is Florence. Is this Judith Morrison? How did you know? I've been waiting for your call, Florence said, and Judith could hear the smile in her voice. I sent that letter 3 days ago. I was starting to worry it got lost in the mail. Judith couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight. Tears were streaming down her face again. Shayla grabbed the phone. Miss Florence? It's Shayla. Shayla. Florence's voice filled with genuine warmth. How are you, sweetheart? How have you been? I'm good. We just got your letter. Miss Florence, is it real? The scholarship? Is it really real? It's absolutely real, Florence said gently. Every word. You stood up for me when no one else would, Shayla. You showed courage I rarely see in adults, let alone in a child. That's worth investing in. That's worth celebrating. Judith had somewhat composed herself. She took the phone back from Shayla, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Ms. Adeyemi, I can't find the words. What you're offering, it's beyond anything I ever dreamed. But it's too much. It's too generous. We can't possibly accept. Ms. Morrison, Florence interrupted gently. May I call you Judith? Of course. Judith, your daughter has something that money cannot buy. Moral courage. The ability to see injustice and refuse to be a bystander. The strength to stand up even when she's afraid. These are the qualities that change the world. These are the qualities that make real leaders. Florence's voice grew softer, more personal. I was that little girl once, Judith. I came to America with nothing. Less than nothing, actually, because I had debt and no connections and people who looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong. Someone helped me. A professor at community college who saw past my accent and my poverty and recognized potential. She changed my life. I built this company, Florence continued, so that I could be comfortable, yes. So I could provide for my family. But I built the foundation so I could be that professor for other young people. So I could give to others what was given to me. Judith was crying again, but quietly now. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me, Florence said firmly. Thanks, Shayla. She reminded me why I started this foundation in the first place. That day on the plane I was tired. I'd become so focused on business, on success, on growth. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable, to need help. Shayla didn't just defend me. She reminded me why this work matters. Why our children need to see that courage is possible, that standing up for what's right has meaning. Florence paused. She reminded me why I built all of this. So that our children, our black children, our children who will face discrimination and prejudice and people who underestimate them, so that they don't have to choose between doing what's right and protecting themselves. So they can afford to have courage. So they can afford to stand up. Your daughter stood up for me without knowing who I was or whether it would benefit her, Florence said. That's integrity. That's character. And yes, I'm rewarding that with a scholarship. But Judith, I hope you'll let me do more than just pay for college. I'd like to mentor Shayla. I'd like to stay in her life if you'll both allow it. I'd like to help shape her path, introduce her to people, open doors. Because the world needs more Shaylas. Judith could barely speak. Of course. Yes. Whatever Shayla wants. Can I talk to her? Florence asked. Judith handed the phone back to Shayla, who took it with shaking hands. I'm here, Shayla said. Shayla, I have a question for you, Florence said. Are you ready to change the world? Shayla let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I want to be a lawyer. I want to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. Then that's exactly what you're going to do, Florence said warmly. And I'm going to help you get there. But first, I'd like to meet with you and your mother. In person. I'd like to come to Detroit. I'd like to see where you live, understand your life, hear about your dreams. Would that be okay? You want to come here? Shayla asked, surprised. To Detroit? To our apartment? Absolutely, Florence said. I'm not interested in some sterile meeting in an office. I want to know you, Shayla. Really know you. The scholarship is just the beginning. I want to be part of your journey if you'll have me. They arranged the meeting for the following Saturday. Florence would fly in personally. No entourage, no security detail, just herself. She'd come to their home, spend the afternoon, get to know them properly. When they hung up, Judith and Shayla just sat there, holding each other, crying and laughing and trying to process what had just happened. Judith had to call in sick to work. She couldn't possibly function, couldn't possibly focus on patients when her entire world had just shifted. She called her supervisor, explained that there was a family emergency but a good one. Please don't worry, I'll explain later, I just can't come in today. They spent the day reading and rereading the letter. Looking up information about Adeyemi Petroleum International and the Adeyemi Foundation. Reading testimonials from previous scholarship recipients who'd gone on to become doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, all of them talking about how Florence hadn't just paid for their education but had mentored them, guided them, opened doors they didn't even know existed. Saturday arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Judith cleaned their small apartment obsessively, even though it was already clean. Shayla changed outfits 3 times, unsure what you wear when a billionaire visits your home. Florence arrived exactly on time, pulling up in a regular sedan, not a limousine. She was dressed simply in slacks and a beautiful silk blouse, carrying a bouquet of flowers and a shopping bag. Judith opened the door, suddenly nervous all over again. But Florence smiled that warm smile that had first caught Shayla's attention on the plane, and stepped inside like she was visiting old friends, not strangers. Judith, she said, handing over the flowers. It's so good to see you. These are for you. Then she turned to Shayla and her face lit up. And you. Look at you. Just as brave and beautiful as I remembered. From the shopping bag she pulled out books. A stack of them. Biographies of Supreme Court justices. Books on civil rights law. Books on effective advocacy. Books Shayla had seen online but never been able to afford. A lawyer needs a library, Florence said, placing the books in Shayla's hands. This is just the start. They sat in the modest living room and Florence asked questions. Not polite small talk but real questions. About Shayla's life, her school, her dreams. About Judith's work, her struggles, her hopes for her daughter. About their family, their history, their story. And Florence shared her own story. Not the sanitized version you read in business magazines but the real one. The racism she'd faced. The doors that had been slammed in her face. The times she'd wanted to give up but couldn't because she'd come too far, sacrificed too much. I was denied a business loan 17 times before someone said yes, Florence told them. 17 times I sat in offices and listened to bankers tell me I was too risky. That my plan wasn't viable. But what they really meant was that I was a black woman with an accent and they couldn't see past that to the business plan that would have made them millions. She looked at Shayla intently. The world will underestimate you. People will look at your skin, your gender, your age and make assumptions. They will put obstacles in your path. And you will have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Then Florence smiled. But you already knew that, didn't you? You stood up on that plane knowing you had no power, knowing people might not believe you, knowing there could be consequences. You did it anyway. That's the kind of strength that doesn't just move mountains, Shayla. It builds empires. They talked for hours. About college options, what Shayla should look for in a school. About law school and the path to becoming an attorney. About the importance of mentorship and networking. About staying true to your values even when success tempts you to compromise. Florence wasn't just offering money. She was offering guidance, wisdom, a roadmap through a world that Shayla was only beginning to navigate. As the afternoon turned to evening, as the winter sun set outside their apartment window, Florence made a promise. "I'm going to stay in your life, Shayla. I'm going to check in on you, meet with you regularly, introduce you to people who can help you. This isn't a transaction where I write a check and disappear. This is a relationship. A mentorship. You stood up for me when I needed it. Now I'm going to stand with you as you build your future." She looked at both of them, this woman who had everything, looking at this mother and daughter who had so little materially but so much in character and dignity and love. "You're going to do extraordinary things," Florence said to Shayla. "And I'm going to make sure you have every possible advantage to do them. The playing field has never been level. But we're going to tilt it in your favor for once." When Florence left that evening, Judith and Shayla stood in the doorway of their apartment, watching her drive away in that ordinary sedan, and they held each other and cried one more time. Because sometimes doing the right thing changes your life in ways you never expected. Sometimes standing up for a stranger opens doors you didn't even know existed. Sometimes the universe rewards courage in the most unexpected and beautiful ways. Shayla Morrison had defended someone being hurt on a plane. She hadn't known she was defending a billionaire. But Florence Adeyemi had known she was witnessing something rarer than wealth. She was witnessing character. And character, true moral courage, was worth investing in. So here's what I want to know, and I really want you to answer this honestly in the comments. If you could give advice to your younger self about taking risks to do what's right, what would you say? Would you tell yourself to be braver? To speak up more? Or would you say you did the best you could with what you knew? And if this story reminded you that courage matters, that standing up makes a difference, that the world still has good people in it who reward character, then please subscribe. Because we all need these reminders. We all need to hear stories about people like Shayla and Florence. Stories that restore our faith in humanity and inspire us to be better. The ending is coming, and I promise you it's worth staying for. So where are they now? What happened to everyone in this story after that winter day when Florence Adeyemi walked into a modest Detroit apartment and changed a family's life forever? Let's start with Amanda Prescott. Amanda was fired from the airline, as you know. Terminated immediately following the investigation. But the consequences didn't stop there. Florence Adeyemi, despite her grace and humility, was also a businesswoman who understood that accountability matters. She filed a civil lawsuit against Amanda for discrimination, harassment, and emotional distress. Not because she needed the money. Florence was a billionaire. She could have bought the entire airline if she wanted to. She filed the lawsuit to make a point. To create a public record. To ensure that Amanda's actions had consequences that would follow her, that would make other flight attendants, other people in positions of minor authority, think twice before abusing that power. The lawsuit is still pending as of now, but Amanda's life has changed dramatically. She tried to find work with other airlines. Every single one rejected her application. Her name is now permanently associated with one of the most viral discrimination incidents in recent aviation history. She tried to rebrand, to move to a different industry, but employers Google names, and what they found was video footage of Amanda dumping white powder on a passenger while making racist comments. Some people might feel sorry for her. Might think she's paid enough. But here's the thing about consequences. They're supposed to be proportional to the harm caused. Amanda didn't just humiliate one woman on one flight. She revealed a pattern of behavior, a depth of prejudice that had likely affected countless passengers over her years of service. How many other people had she discriminated against who didn't have the courage to report it? How many had she hurt who didn't have a 12-year-old girl willing to stand up? Amanda Prescott learned a hard lesson. Your choices follow you. The cruelty you put into the world has a way of coming back. Now let's talk about Dominique. Remember Dominique? The young Latina flight attendant who looked troubled but stayed silent for most of the incident? Who finally found her voice at the end and told the truth about what she'd witnessed. Dominique was promoted. Not immediately, not as a direct reward, but 6 months after the incident, after she'd become an outspoken advocate for change within the airline. She leads the airline's equity and inclusion program now. She travels to training sessions, tells her story about the cost of silence, about how staying quiet made her complicit, about how speaking truth ultimately saved her career and her conscience. She reached out to Florence and Shayla after everything settled. Wrote them both letters apologizing for not acting sooner, thanking them for showing her what courage looks like. Florence wrote back. They've stayed in touch. Dominique is proof that it's never too late to do the right thing, that redemption is possible if you're willing to own your mistakes and work to be better. The airline itself underwent massive changes. They didn't just release a press statement and move on. They implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all employees. Mandatory sessions, quarterly refreshers, zero-tolerance policies with real teeth. They hired diversity consultants. They changed their hiring practices. They created reporting mechanisms so that passengers who experience discrimination have a clear path to justice. Did they do this out of the goodness of their hearts? No. They did it because the publicity was devastating, because they lost millions in bookings, because Florence Adeyemi's lawyer made it very clear that if systemic changes weren't implemented, there would be more lawsuits, more scrutiny, more consequences. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter why they changed. It matters that they did. Other passengers, other black women, other people who might have faced the same discrimination Amanda was so comfortable dispensing, they fly safer now. They fly with more dignity. Because Shayla stood up. One child's courage literally changed corporate policy. And Shayla? Let me tell you about Shayla Morrison now. She's 16 years old, a junior in high school. And she's already been accepted to 7 universities. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Georgetown, Howard. Every single one offering admission because Florence's scholarship meant Shayla could apply without fear of cost, could choose based purely on where she wanted to go, what program would serve her dreams best. She's planning to study law with a focus on civil rights. Specifically, she wants to work on cases involving discrimination in public accommodations. She wants to be the lawyer who defends people who face what Florence faced. She wants to hold people like Amanda accountable. She wants to change systems. Shayla gives talks now at her school at youth conferences about moral courage. About standing up even when you're scared. She's poised and articulate and wise beyond her years, but she's also still just a teenager who likes music and movies and hanging out with friends. The incident didn't define her. It shaped her, yes, but she's more than that one moment. She and Florence talk regularly. Every few weeks they have lunch or dinner, just the two of them. Florence introduces her to lawyers, judges, activists. Takes her to her offices, shows her how business works, teaches her about power and how to wield it responsibly. It's not just mentorship. It's a genuine relationship. Florence treats Shayla like family, like the daughter she never had. And Shayla has learned from Florence what success can look like when you don't forget where you came from. Judith Morrison, Shayla's mother, finally reduced to one job. Just one. For the first time in 13 years, she works normal hours. She comes home while it's still light outside. She has energy to cook dinner with Shayla, to help with homework not because Shayla needs it but because it's time together. She sleeps 7 hours a night now instead of 4. Florence didn't just give Shayla a scholarship. She changed Judith's life too. Because when you lift up a child, you lift up their whole family. Judith still works as a nurse, still loves her job, but now she works to live rather than living to work. The desperation is gone. The fear that kept her awake at night, calculating and recalculating costs that never added up, that's gone too. Judith cries less now, but when she does cry, it's from gratitude. From the overwhelming knowledge that her daughter is going to be okay. More than okay. Shayla is going to soar. And Florence? Florence Adeyemi expanded her foundation scholarship program after meeting Shayla. She renamed the character-based component of the program, the Courage Initiative. It specifically seeks out young people who have demonstrated moral courage, who have stood up against injustice, who have shown integrity when it cost them something. Since that day on the plane, the Courage Initiative has funded 47 more scholarships. 47 other young people who did the right thing, who spoke truth to power, who refused to be bystanders, they're getting the same opportunity Shayla received. College. Mentorship. A chance to become who they're meant to be. Florence still travels commercially. Still flies first class on regular airlines. She could travel privately. It would be easier, more comfortable, certainly safer from people like Amanda. But she refuses. Because staying connected to how most people live, staying vulnerable to the same indignities that ordinary people face, that keeps her grounded. That reminds her why her work matters. And you know what? She's faced discrimination twice more since that flight. Once from a hotel clerk who assumed she couldn't afford the penthouse suite she'd booked. Once from a restaurant host who tried to seat her near the kitchen despite her reservation clearly stating she'd requested a window table. Both times, Florence handled it with the same quiet dignity. Both times she documented everything. Both times, there were consequences for the people who discriminated against her. And both times, there was someone watching who learned that staying silent is not an option. Remember Stanley? The businessman who finally spoke up after staying quiet too long? Stanley joined the board of the Adeyemi Foundation. He donated a substantial sum to the Courage Initiative. But more importantly, he changed how he lives his life. He uses his privilege now, his position as a successful white man in corporate America, to advocate. When he sees discrimination in meetings, in hiring decisions, in the casual racism that permeates so many professional spaces, he speaks up. Every time. Even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. He tells people about Shayla. About how a 12-year-old girl shamed him into finding his courage. About how he'll never forget the feeling of sitting in that airplane seat, watching injustice unfold and choosing comfort over character. He tells people he never wants to feel that way again. Stanley is proof that witnesses to injustice can change too, that even people who fail the test the first time can learn and grow and become advocates. So that's where they are. That's what happened to everyone whose lives intersected on Flight 2847 on a summer morning when a flight attendant made a choice she couldn't take back and a child made a choice that changed everything. But let me tell you what this story is really about. This story is about the ripple effect of one brave moment. One child, 12 years old, scared and alone, chose courage. And that choice rippled outward. It changed Florence's life, reminded her why her foundation mattered. It changed Judith's life, gave her relief from fear. It changed Dominique's life, showed her the cost of silence. It changed airline policy, made flying safer for countless passengers. It changed Stanley's life, taught him to use his privilege for good. It changed 47 other young people's lives through the Courage Initiative. One moment. One choice. All those ripples. Standing up cost something. It cost Shayla her comfort, her safety, her childhood invisibility. She took a risk. She could have been thrown off that flight. She could have been dismissed as a troublemaker. She could have faced consequences that followed her. But silence would have cost more. It would have cost her integrity. It would have cost Florence her dignity. It would have cost every other passenger who witnessed it their self-respect. It would have told Amanda that her behavior was acceptable, that she could continue discriminating without consequence. Silence always costs more than courage. The price is just paid in different currency. Courage costs comfort. Silence costs your soul. Here's something crucial to understand about this story. Florence Adeyemi didn't need rescuing. She's a billionaire. She owns one of the largest oil companies in America. She has lawyers who could have buried Amanda Prescott in litigation. She has influence that could have destroyed that airline's reputation with a single interview. She has power that most people can't even conceptualize. Florence could have handled Amanda herself. Could have smiled and waited and then unleashed consequences that would have made national news. But Shayla didn't know that. Shayla saw a woman being hurt and stood up because it was right. Not because of who Florence was, but because of what was happening to her. Shayla defended a stranger without knowing whether that stranger had any power or resources. Without knowing if standing up would benefit her in any way. That's true character. Doing the right thing without expecting reward. Acting with integrity when no one's watching, when there's no benefit, when the cost might be high. The scholarship wasn't payment. It wasn't Florence buying Shayla's defense. It was recognition. It was Florence seeing something rare and valuable and choosing to invest in it. Florence invests in oil wells and refineries and infrastructure. But she saw in Shayla something worth more than all of that, genuine moral courage. And she invested in that the way you invest in anything precious. By nurturing it. By protecting it. By making sure it grows into something even more remarkable. Here's what I need you to understand. We never know who we're sitting next to. That woman on the plane could have been anyone. A schoolteacher. A struggling single mother. A homeless person who'd saved for months to afford that ticket. It wouldn't have mattered. She deserved dignity. She deserved to be defended. Not because of her bank account or her job title or her accomplishments, but because she was a human being experiencing cruelty. Florence being a billionaire is an amazing twist to this story. It makes for a compelling narrative, a satisfying ending where the hero gets rewarded. But the real point is this: Shayla would have stood up regardless. Would have defended Florence even if she'd been poor. Even if there had been no reward possible. That's the lesson. Everyone deserves dignity regardless of wealth, status, or appearance. The homeless man on the subway deserves the same respect as the CEO in the boardroom. The elderly woman at the grocery store deserves the same courtesy as the young influencer. The immigrant with broken English deserves the same patience as the native-born professor. We defend people because they're people. Not because of what they might do for us in return. Children are watching how adults behave. Shayla learned courage from Judith, her mother, who taught her that silence makes you part of the problem. Judith taught that by living it. By standing up for her patients at the hospital when they were treated poorly. By speaking up when she witnessed injustice even though she was exhausted and just wanted to get through her shift. One generation teaches the next what matters. Judith taught Shayla. Now Shayla is teaching others. The kids at her school who hear her speak. The young people who read about her story. They're learning that courage is possible. That standing up makes a difference. That your voice matters even if you're young, even if you're scared, even if you think you have no power. We teach by how we live. Children don't listen to what we say nearly as much as they watch what we do. If we stay silent in the face of injustice, we teach them silence. If we speak up, we teach them courage. What are you teaching the next generation? Here's my final call to action for you, and I want you to really hear this. If you see something wrong, be the person who stands up. Not tomorrow. Not when it's convenient. Not when the risk is low. In the moment. When it's hard. When it costs you something. You never know whose life you might change. The person being hurt, yes. But also your own. Because every time you act with courage, you become more courageous. Every time you stand up for what's right, it gets easier the next time. Every time you refuse to be a bystander, you strengthen that moral muscle. Shayla Morrison changed Florence Adeyemi's life by reminding her that goodness exists. By showing her that the next generation is watching and learning and ready to be brave. But Shayla changed her own life too. She became the kind of person who can stand up, who has practiced courage, who knows what she's capable of. That's worth more than any scholarship. The scholarship opens doors, yes. But the courage she demonstrated, the character she revealed, that's what will carry her through those doors and help her build the life and career and legacy she's dreaming of. You never know who you're defending. You never know who's watching. You never know what ripples your moment of courage will create. Shayla Morrison defended a stranger on a plane. She didn't know she was defending a billionaire. She didn't know her life was about to change in unimaginable ways. She didn't know she was about to become an example, an inspiration, a story that would be told to remind people what courage looks like. She just knew that what was happening was wrong. And she stood up. But Florence Adeyemi knew she was witnessing something rarer than wealth, rarer than success, rarer than power or influence or any material achievement. She was witnessing character. Pure, uncalculated, courageous character. The kind of integrity that can't be taught in schools or bought with money. The kind of moral courage that comes from being raised right, from internalizing the right values, from choosing who you want to be when the moment of testing arrives. And that is worth investing in. That is worth nurturing. That is worth celebrating and protecting and helping to flourish. Because the world doesn't need more billionaires. It has plenty of those. The world needs more people like Shayla Morrison. People who see injustice and refuse to look away. People who stand up even when they're scared. People who do the right thing because it's right, not because it benefits them. That's what changes the world. Not money. Not power. Character. Courage. The willingness to act when action is required. So here's my question for you, and I really want you to think about it, to answer it honestly in the comments. What would you have done on that plane? Would you have been Stanley, sitting silent until a child shamed you into speaking? Would you have been Dominique, troubled but scared to act? Would you have been Shayla, standing up despite your fear? And more importantly, what will you do tomorrow when you see something wrong? What will you do the next time you witness injustice? Will you look away? Will you stay comfortable? Or will you find your courage? If this story moved you, if it challenged you, if it reminded you what we're capable of when we choose courage over comfort, then subscribe to this channel. Share this story. Let it ripple outward the way Shayla's courage rippled outward. Let it inspire someone else to stand up. Let it be part of the change we all want to see in the world. Because in the end, that's all we can do. Stand up when it matters. Use whatever power we have, even if it's just our voice, to defend those who need defending. Teach the next generation by example what courage looks like. And trust that those ripples, those small acts of bravery, they add up. They accumulate. They change the world one moment at a time. Shayla Morrison defended a stranger. She didn't know she was defending a billionaire. But Florence Adeyemi knew she was witnessing something rarer than wealth. She was witnessing character. And that, my friends, is worth investing in. That is worth celebrating. That is worth passing on to the next generation. That is how we change the world. One brave moment at a time.